This is the history of recorded music in 7 minutes. Around 1473, music notation was written down on paper and people bought sheet music so that they could perform their favorite songs for their friends. This was the only method of recording music for 400 years. In 1877, Thomas Edison figured out how to record sounds passing through a large metal cone by carving them into wax cylinders through a needle. This invention was called the phonograph. Edison's primary interest was in preserving classical music and capturing speeches. He had no idea of the effect that this invention would have on the music industry. In 1896, Emil Berliner realized that shellac discs were cheaper and lasted longer than wax tubes, and the record was born. These discs would spin at a standardized speed of 78 rotations per minute, or RPMs. This number was entirely arbitrary and would be the standard for many years. Disc and tube format competed for 25 years, but eventually the disc won out, mostly due to better marketing. Both of these systems would record live off the floor and directly to the disc acoustically. In the early years, two companies dominated the music industry: the Victor Talking Machine Company and the Columbia Gramophone Company. During this period, much of the popular music of the time, including opera, was recorded and released. The recorded music industry boomed, and by 1922, recorded music had outpaced sheet music in sales for the first time ever. Being able to play back recorded music easily, the National Broadcast Company, or NBC, was founded and the radio industry erupted. The obvious benefit of radio was that not only were people no longer limited to their private music collections, but it was also free and the content was ever-changing. The radio industry would dwarf and then eventually absorb the recorded music industry entirely. While the business of recorded music shrank, the boom in commercial radio saw many advancements in audio recording technology. Microphones and amplifiers that were developed for radio broadcasts were now being used in music recordings. In 1924, Bell Laboratories developed an electrical recording process that would bring the acoustic recording process to an end, as well as increase the dynamic range of recordings to include everything from 100 Hz to 5,000 Hz. During the 1920s, the first blues recordings created by black artists began to appear and would see much commercial success. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, Delta Records president Jack Kapp cut the cost of records from 75 cents down to 33 cents. Decca would then release what are considered the first albums, or a series of records that came as a package. Records at the time could only hold around 4.5 minutes per side, with many longer classical works being broken up over several records. In 1935, the German BASF company would introduce magnetic tape technology developed during World War II. Tape was easier to set up, had a nearly unlimited length for recording time, was easier to edit, and by 1947 would entirely replace direct-to-disc recording. In 1984, after much labor, Columbia Records introduced a slower-playing LP that could hold over 20 minutes per 12-inch side at 33.25 RPM. They also began distributing LPs on vinyl, which was far more durable than shellac. Columbia could now house more songs from their catalog per LP and sell more music to consumers. This is where the modern concept of albums began. In 1957, the first stereo LPs were made available, bringing the world of music out of mono and into glorious two-channel audio. In 1963, the Philips cassette tape debuted. These tapes were compact and easier to reproduce than vinyl, and this would garner the invention early popularity. In 1965, the Beatles began recording with 4-track recording machines as opposed to the standard 2-track. They would record an instrument and then bus it down to 2 tracks, effectively piling up sounds. This way they could get as many instruments onto a recording as they wanted. The guitarist Les Paul would also use this technique to pile up guitars, creating the wall of sound guitar tone that is used heavily in recording today. In 1966, the Beach Boys would release Pet Sounds, which is effectively the blueprint for the first concept album. Up until now, albums had mostly been collections of singles from an artist or group, or classical music pieces. In 1967, the Beatles would release Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club club band. This was their most daring album and a response to their love of pet sounds. This is widely considered the birth of the concept album as an artistic medium. In the 1970s, 8-track tapes appeared, and while they saw some popularity, by the 1980s they had been all but phased out. During the 1970s, a quest for better noise reduction and broader dynamic range in recordings was well underway. Dolby A and B systems could help with tape hiss, but were unable to reduce recording surface noises and other imperfections. In 1978, the first digital recording of a master studio tape was made. This greatly decreased the noise and extended the dynamic range of recorded audio. It wouldn't take long for digital to start popping up in studios all over the world. In 1983, the first digital disc player was introduced in the US. It played small laser-red compact discs. Noises and distortion were basically non-existent, and they had a larger dynamic range than any previous commercial system available. CDs would dominate the market for many years and effectively revitalize the recorded music industry. In 1987, the industry would sell 5.57 billion of all recorded products. In 1992, the Sony Minidisc and the Philips digital compact cassette would hit the market. These were the first home digital recorders and would launch recorded music into the digital future. By the late 90s, hardware CD burners and rippers would reach the consumer computer market, allowing people to digitize their recorded collections. In 1999, Napster would come along and allow people to share their music over the internet through peer-to-peer file sharing. This would throw the recorded music industry completely on its head. Most major labels were slow to respond to this dynamic shift in mass digital music sharing. Instead of fighting this shift, Apple embraced this new distribution network and launched iTunes in 2001. In effect, they single-handedly created the internet music industry as we know it. In 2006, Spotify would bring digital music to the world stage, moving consumers from the large collections of purchased music to a system of renting all music on the platform for a monthly subscription fee. While physical recorded media is still a viable revenue source for the music industry, it's undeniable that the digital streaming audio covers a majority of how the world digests music, with an estimated 80% of consumed music being through subscription streaming services. We've come a long way in the past 150 years in ways that we could never even imagine, and I'm excited to see what the next 150 years could possibly hold. If you're interested, you can go check out my Spotify to hear the recorded music that I've made, or you can listen to it here on YouTube. I'm Andy Negative, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye!